In the 1960s, Chile was a democratic nation, despite many of their neighbors being under dictatorships. In the mid-20th century, but the Americans became heavily involved in politics in Latin America. Since the Cuban Revolution, and through projects like the Alliance for Progress, millions of dollars were sent out to their allies. Like Betancourt in Venezuela plus, the CIA also helped start coups in countries like Bolivia and Brazil. And in Chile in 1964, they sent money to help Montalva win an election against Salvador Allende, a socialist. However, in Chile, no presidents can serve 2 terms. So in 1970, Montalva was forced to step down. His party, the Christian Democratic Party, was taken over by Radomiro Tomic. He, however, came in 3rd during the election, losing 2 former presidents, Jorge Alessandri and Salvador Allende. But no candidate won an outright majority. So the National Congress had to pick a leader. The CIA tried to get the National Congress to select Jorge Alessandri, only to have him later resign and bring Montalva into power once again. But the National Congress chose Allende, and he began to implement many socialist reforms. These helped bolster his popularity, but the Americans withdrew aid to Chile, and the country suffered through mass inflation. Plus, his close connections with socialist leaders like Castro worried many on the right. So, in Parliament, they united to form the Confederation of Democracy and stopped further reforms. And the CIA helped fund opposition to Allende, like the El Mercurio newspaper, which called for him to be overthrown. He also had very little support from the largely right wing, military officers who lived in a relatively closed-off community, but these officers still had a great deal of political influence. For instance, in 1969, soldiers rose up to demand higher wages. As part of the Tacnazo insurrection, however, the new army commander-in-chief, René Schneider, promised to keep the military out of politics when Allende was elected. This angered those that believed Allende was poised to install a communist dictatorship, so Schneider was assassinated just a year later. His replacement, Carlos, perhaps, maintained this policy, but still, paramilitary groups like Fatherland and Liberty were formed. And after a couple years of rising tensions, Colonel Super took his tank regiment to the presidential palace. In June 1973, although this coup failed, it became apparent that, without the support of the military and national police, Allende could not restore order, and the poor economy led to strikes breaking out around the country. Wives of military officers protested outside Pratt's house, and he was forced to resign and was replaced by Augustus Pinochet. Then the members of the Confederacy of Democracy voted to ask if ministers and military could put an end to Allende's alleged unconstitutional practices. Allende responded by saying that he had acted constitutionally, said the vote was so in disorder, and in early September promised to hold a referendum on his policies, fearing that the country would become even more left-wing. The head of the Navy, José Toribio Merino, got support from the newly appointed heads of the Air Force, Gustavo Lee and police forces in Mendoza, and then, with Augustus Pinochet, they launched a coup early in the morning of September 11th. Commandos blockaded the port of Valparaiso. While the Army and Air Force took out radio and TV stations, Allende retreated to the presidential palace, with members of the military that remained loyal. But now he had very little communication with the rest of the country. By 9 a.m., the military declared that they had taken over most of the country, and called for Allende to resign. He, however, refused to resign and also refused offers to escape the capital to lead a counter-coup later on. Instead, he waited within the presidential palace. As fighting in the capital continued for a few hours, and the palace was bombed, it is believed he committed suicide within the palace, just before it was captured by the military. With Allende gone, Pinochet, Merino, Mendoza, and Lee initially shared power as part of the military government, and suspended the Constitution and Congress, and banned opposing political parties. Pinochet, as head of the army, was made head of this juntail, and eventually consolidated power and made himself president. And he would go on to arrest tens of thousands of political enemies, many of which were infamously held in the National Stadium, and killed many political opponents. The American role in the coup is disputed, but it is said that they helped fan the flames beforehand and help justify the coup by spreading the idea that Allende was planning a Marxist self-coup. As part of Plan Zeta, the Americans did, however, maintain close relations with Pinochet, who ruled Chile until 1992.